Hi, everybody. Welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. Today I'm talking to Rachel Patterson, and it's been a long time. It's actually been 2 years. I went back and looked it up. Last time that we talked was August 11th, 2022. And Rachel has had a baby in between that time, which I think has a lot to do with that. But I've talked to her recently, and I think you're going to be like continuing with your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah. Jared's been really encouraging and other people have been really encouraging. I had my fourth baby and I am not young. So it definitely hit me a little harder than I think the other kids. And it's also nice though, because I've had a chance to kind of take a step away from the content and let it kind of percolate in my head. Um, One of the things that I think is so interesting about studying women in priesthood in the LDS church is like the way that it continually leads you back to the temple and to like eternal families. So that also fit right in with having another baby and expanding our family.
Yeah,
So
and
we're
that's actually what we're going to talk about today is having children, right? Because we had this
That's
recent
true.
BYU Women's Conference 2022 or 2024, and and that was like one of the topics that they were talking about was having children.
Yeah, I admire Camille Johnson, Sister Johnson, right? Camille M.
Yeah,
Johnson. This is such a hard topic to tackle because women have different stories. And she's really clear about it. She's like, I am not meaning to project, like, make anyone feel bad or project my life story onto anyone, which is such a hard thing to do when you're tackling the topic of having children because there's a lot of people who are struggling with infertility and there's a lot of women who haven't been able to get married and they would like to have gotten married. But she's really clear about we're still going to emphasize the principle and the importance of having children. But given the givens, and we don't want to make anyone feel bad, we are still going to talk about the importance of having kids. And I think that's the right strategy. Like I think for a long time, out of a concern of making people feel bad, we have really not talked about. I mean, I don't know what your experience was like growing up. My parents made a joke. We had five kids in our family, and my parents made a joke that they were like, "Oh, the Celestial Six, we just missed the Celestial Kingdom," because everybody that we grew up around had six kids. Like families were really big a generation ago. And when you look at the fertility stats for the church, it says like, oh, three or four. But the reality is if you exclude the boomers, we're really around 2.3. If you exclude the boomer generation who had bigger families, us, those of us who are like 40 and younger. And obviously there's variability there, like you can have kids later in life. And I think they're really good about like not throwing a rule at us anymore, like saying you should have this number of children, but you can't ignore the fact that there kind of has been a bit of an absence or a lessening of rhetoric at all about having kids. And I think she was bold and clear in just walking that fine line in this talk of saying, like, we are not shaming or making anyone feel bad about their life situation, but we are going to emphasize the principles of the eternal gospel, which are that we believe in mothering and we believe in parenthood and we believe in having children.
yeah.
So
Be
yeah.
be fruitful and multiply. I think it's pretty clear. Like if you've done any family history and you start going back, it was common to have families that had many children, and you kind of get the sense that something happened along the way from those previous generations that had less than what we do materially, and now when we have more, and now we're having smaller families. So, what do you think happened, in your opinion?
Well, what's funny that you say that is because actually in grad school I did fertility studies in the Middle East. Unlike I was studying Muslim populations because they're very traditional populations, and then you have some countries with really high fertility rates and countries with really low fertility rates, which was kind of a neat study to like they have the same doctrine, what's the variability? And in that process, I discovered I guess you could call him like a fertility social studies professor, and he said this quote that I'll never forget because I hadn't started my family at the time. I think I'd just barely gotten married. He said the greatest way to decrease the fertility rate is to increase the quality of life of middle class. Because once they have a higher quality of life, they will pick a new car over a new kid. And remember having such an aha moment with that and talking to my dad about it and being like, once the middle class experiences a degree of wealth that they haven't known before, they won't go back. And I, around that time, having like a young family, we went to the beach with some friends who weren't LDS, and they are Christian, and they said, wow, like Mormons are so wealthy. Like, what is the deal? You guys are so successful. And you're like the new entrepreneurs. Like, it is so interesting that like when we were growing up or in the 90s and 80s, I don't know if that was our label, but we have become a very entrepreneurially, economically minded people. So I think that is true. I think
Yeah.
once you get a
Well,
taste of economic wealth, you're like hard to go back.
in some ways, I feel like that's counterintuitive because you would think, oh, you have more money, so you can have more kids. And I have seen people that have done that. Like I'm all about acquiring wealth, but not having it as like a top priority, like having your priorities straight. But I have seen people that because of their wealth, they could have more kids, and so that's really good if that's what you're doing with it. But one thing that I've noticed is that the church is all about like education. You need to go get your education so you can secure a living for your family, but there's like so much emphasis on going to college and getting a good job that sometimes I feel like it's like it like starts like getting out of hand, and it's just like about more and more and more wealth, and then like the family, your potential children get left behind. And this is something that was addressed by Thomas S. Monson. I'm just going to read this really quick. I'm not going to
Yeah.
screen share, but this is something that never left my mind once I heard it. This is from the April 2005 General Conference, Thomas S. Monson, called Constant Truths for Changing Times. And he says, avoid the philosophy and excuse that yesterday's luxuries have become today's necessities. They aren't necessities unless we ourselves make them such. Many of our young couples today want to begin with multiple cars and the type of home their mother and dad worked a lifetime to obtain. Consequently, they either enter into long-term debt on the basis of two salaries, uh, because that's like a big thing too. If both parents have to work, then it's like, maybe we should wait for a time when the wife can stay at home or maybe just have like a part-time job and more easily take care of the children, or raise the children. Anyway, continuing, perhaps too late, they find that changes do come. Women have children, sickness stalks some families, jobs are lost, natural disasters and other situations occur, and no longer can the mortgage payment based on the income of two salaries be made. It is essential for us to live within our means. So what I see, and I'm not trying to like shame anybody, but this I you guys, I'm a very candid person. I hope that you realize this after watching my channel. And I don't mean to be rude or condescending or judgmental, but what I've seen in my own life is you have a lot of young couples that place all this priority on like finishing school, or they have to have a house first, before like not living in an apartment. They have to have a house before they can have children. And in the meantime, going on these vacations to Mexico or Europe, riding bicycles in the countryside of Ireland and posting it all over their social media. And it seems like all that money and all that attention goes to those kind of things rather than starting a family. And it's okay to live in an apartment. It's okay for it to take a while before you can afford a house. And that's what me and Jenica have done. I'm not trying to be like holier than thou, but it's okay. It's fine to live in poverty. The more important thing is to have a family, and then those things can come over time. And in our case, it has, and we're still like trying to, increase our wealth, but like we're placing priority on having a family. We stopped having kids because Jenica, she has to have C-sections, and it's getting like more and more risky each time. And there's other things too, but we would have had a much larger family if it hadn't been for certain complications. Anyway, so that's
I
what I
mean,
have to say about
I can attest to that because I grew up in New England, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and New York to some extent. And um there's a lot of trends that hit New England way before they hit the rest of the country. And one of the things that culturally hit New England before the rest of the country was a real emphasis on academia and education. And you really grew up with this just incredible value set, like a value being placed on getting an education, being smart, getting into college, pursuing extensive college for women. And what I also always think is interesting is if you look at the map of the United States, what is the part of the country that has the lowest fertility rate? It's New England. It's been negative for 15, like 10, 15 years. And that makes sense though, because um when you have women being told that being a mother is, a pitiful, pathetic, silly thing, and that if you really want value by society, you need to go get an education, they will do that. And so I look at my graduating high school class, wildly successful. All of us were wildly successful. But I have this funny situation where I was raised with this incredible value set of like get an education and be successful, apply yourself academically. And then the gospel was teaching me through what I saw in my wards, in what we believed. And this is where I think the Young Women's Program was ahead of its time, ahead of all of this, because they changed the Young Women's theme they changed it twice, like late 90s and then early 2000s. And they changed the phrasing to really specifically emphasize and continue to emphasize having children and raising families, emphasizing this idea of like, take pride in your role of being a mother. And so when I went to college, I worked, and I started feeling the quote by Ezra Taft Benson, I think, that says, oh my, it might be Kimball, who says, no success in life will compensate for failure in the home. My dad always said that quote to me, which was, no success in life will compensate for failure in the home. That is such wise prophetic advice. And I worked with women where I saw that happen. I saw these incredibly successful professional women who were a little older than me, maybe like 10 years older than me, who were wildly successful and had no one that they could date, and were looking at the reality that they might not be able to have a family. And every single one of them was saying, I would trade it all. Like, I want a family. I want a marriage. I want a love. I want to share my life with someone. And so I really am grateful that the principles of family life and prioritizing marriage are being reemphasized.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, like, I love Sherry Do and I love Sharon Eubank. But when you make women who are single go-getters the poster children of the LDS Church for women for like 2 decades, like, don't be surprised if that's kind of the role modeling that everyone wants to pursue. Like, mothering's really hard and it's pretty thankless. And so I like that they're promoting women like Camille M. Johnson, who says, I went to law school, I was a lawyer, and I love being a mother. And I'm so glad I had children. And if you have the chance to have children, have children. I think it's really important that we walk that fine line where we don't hurt people's feelings, but we do emphasize the importance of having children and um, prioritizing marriage. I
Yeah.
don't think it's fair, but young women do have a shorter time horizon to get their act in order.
And and I know that we both love Sherry Do. I particularly love her because ever since I've done this channel, I've like referred to a bunch of her talks, and she's from
Yeah.
Kansas, and I don't know her life story, so but yeah. Okay, so I think one thing that happens is there's like a lot of community pressure, because like you don't want to be, for example, in a ward where you're like the poorest person, or out of your family. Maybe
Mhm.
you have, brothers, sisters, cousins, and everybody else is doing better than you. And so you feel the pressure to compete and, you know, keeping up with the Joneses. I feel like that's one thing that drives this kind of like materialism, is like you like feel like you have to like keep up. Otherwise it's like, oh, what's wrong with you? You weren't able to, you know, whatever. And so I think like a lot of it is competition. Some of it may be like pleasure. You're seeking for wealth because you want to live comfortably, certainly. But for other people, they're more drawn to these like social competitions where you want to be at the head of the pack, or you want to be at the top of the pecking order. And so I think we have to like stop and re-examine and think, are we like letting that drive our decisions more than the words of the prophets or what the Lord would
Yeah.
have you do in having a family. So I think that that's a huge problem, is the pressure to maintain a certain lifestyle, essentially, because if you don't, then you look like a loser or like you're incompetent or whatever. And that's not the
Yeah.
case at all. It's not the case at all. And I've lived a life like that where like we've been behind like for example what my wife's family, where they're all doing all these things, but we're having a family and we're raising them, and Jenica's at home teaching our kids. And I know it's had like a big impact on our children, Jenica being able to stay home. The Lord's made it possible for her to do that because that's like one of our values. We prayed for it. And miraculously, it has happened in a world where so commonly you do have to have two incomes to live normally. But we've done it, and that it's like required sacrifice on my part, like working at crappy jobs, literally risking my life,
Yeah.
joining the army, which by the way, Rachel's husband is in the army too, so army huh. And but like it's been worth it, and it's had an impact on our kids, a huge impact. So I don't know. Yeah, we
I'd
I
be
guess
interested to know from like all of your followers, if people want to comment, like, why do you think in the church, in the LDS, the reason it's interesting to have this conversation about the LDS culture and community is because we do have a pretty core belief, especially when you consider the larger sign of salvation and like the eternities and the importance of family, and why people think that we have seen a decrease in fertility in the LDS culture now. I mean, I think another thing is I don't think that we can stress the impact that increased divorce rates have had on the next generation of young people. My parents are still married, but my husband's parents were divorced several times. And I think that that can be a traumatizing experience for the next generation, that they know that getting married is a very high risk. And so I think it can harm the confidence that young people have with going to get married. And so when you have social media telling them, go travel the world and have this cool Instagram life, guaranteed fun, or take this risk and get married, and you can say it'll be great, it'll work out, but they know that's not true because they've either lived it themselves, their parents are divorced, or they're seeing it all around them. Because we can't deny that that is also a that is a we've navigated that as a culture, um of making sure everyone feels involved and belongs, even if you're a single parent, even if you're from a divorced family or a blended family. But I think the impact of marriages falling apart has impacted the younger generation of people, because the other aspect of lowered fertility rates is delayed marriage. And I'm actually going to put a little bit more of the responsibility here on the young women with this, because I don't very often meet young men in singles wards who are like, I don't want to get married. I hear them saying, I'm open to dating seriously, but I meet women at BYU who are like, oh no, I'm not interested in dating for marriage. I'm going on a mission, or I want to get my degree first. So I think that's why I think this talk is so poignantly important, is because this message really might need to come from women leaders in the church to young women in the church. Because I meet a lot of young men who are like, I'd love to have a family, but I go to BYU and I can't find any girls who actually want to date and get married. I don't know if
why do
that's
you think
something I've heard,
why do you think that is?
why young women are.
Yeah, why is it that you're seeing these like this like group of young women that are like preferring to like go on missions or finish their degree? Like, what do you think's driving that? Like, why would there
I
be
mean,
that
I
difference between like young men and young women?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I think that we have to remember that this generation of girls are growing up with social media. So they are getting like a very hyper palatable example of what the single life can be when you don't have to worry about having kids. And, when you give up your 20s, or, your mid, you give up your 20s to have babies and settle down, kind of join the struggle bus. you really have to have a very fixed and taught and role modeled vision of the eternal family to overcome what's being shown to you on social media. Travel and get your degree. I also think um, society, and this is not new, it's just more potent. Society kind of, and I say this as a woman who's like achieved a lot, and I'm really proud of choosing to be a mom. But society really beats you up when you choose to be a mom. Like it really makes you feel like you're kind of a joke. And the only place that you can go for refuge to believe that what you're doing is meaningful is the gospel of Jesus Christ, as I believe has been taught in the Church of Jesus Christ. Um, and then I think, you know, I do think that the way that women talk about their own experience mothering to the next generation has a very huge impact for better or for worse. So like every young women, like I know several girls who are either converts or came from tiny families, like they were one or two kids, but they went on to have a huge family. I was like, why did you make that change? And they're like, my young women's leader. My young women's leader loved being a mother. She was so happy. I could see with my own eyes what a beautiful experience that was. But I was the young women's president for a while in my ward, and I saw girls who like really had a very palpable disdain for becoming a mother. And maybe they were resentful of the pressure they felt from our culture. But I think it was also, I noticed that their mothers uh, did not speak about their own mothering in a positive way, which is fair because sometimes being a mother is hard. But if you're always talking about it in a rhetoric like, oh, these kids, and oh, why did I give up so much for you guys? Like, these girls are not going to choose it. Like, why would they
Yeah.
choose something that looks miserable? And I think that I've always said to my husband, like, we are our own greatest PR. If we want our kids to get married, we want grandchildren, they need to see us being happy. They need to see family life needs to be a good experience for them. And so, yeah, I think you are your own greatest PR. And if you want grandkids, you need to be kind of almost marketing to your own kids.
Well, what's interesting is that in this talk by Camille Johnson, one of the other themes was like, where can you go to uh, for truth and for because there's like so much deception and confusion in this world, and there's competing voices. And so she talked a lot about following the prophet and how you can gain a testimony of the prophet. But just basically like there's this problem that we have, or this challenge that we have as a church to um stick to faithful sources and sometimes be that faithful source, because if you don't speak up and you don't become your own PR person, then darkness is going to fill that void. You're going to get those philosophies of the world that are like, oh no, you need to like live your best life, and FOMO, and you only live once, and all this stuff. You need to like go out and experience the world and travel, and make sure that you're happy and that you're fulfilled. So like that's what they're going to hear. And you were talking about social media, and that's like a key to it too. Social media exacerbates everything because that's where a lot of this like stuff comes in through, whether it's like this messaging, or going back to the whole competition thing where you see like your friends, your family, like going on trips and buying nice houses, and then you feel the pressure because you're looking so much at social media to like you're feeling the need to like keep up with them, when that's not really right for you at that time in life, so. But anyway, yeah, it's important to talk and not just be quiet, and even worse, like complain about how hard it is to be a parent. But we have to like be actively engaged and talk about why having a family is important, and why it's good and a blessing. And that's a reliable source, because listening to media, that's not always a good source. Usually there's an agenda there, that's trying to get you to not have children and essentially depopulate the world. And yeah, so
Yeah,
faithful
and
sources.
she talks about that. She says, I think she quotes President Russell M. Nelson, and he says, "We need women who have the vision of Mother Eve." And I really love that phrase because I actually think that the vision, like, I mean, the vision of Mother Eve, what based on what we know about Eve's decision to partake of the fruit, because she was that committed to legacy and progeny and children, right? Her vision was extensive. And so I think about how do we transmit that vision of Mother Eve to our daughters or our children? And I do think it needs to come either like from young women's leaders or in families. And I've seen that happen in my own. We live in the East Coast, so the LDS community is not giant here. It's pretty great, but it's also, you have to be strong. And you mentioned earlier, like you've seen families, like wealth isn't necessarily a distinguisher. Like I know several very wealthy families in the area, and I mean, they have like 9 kids, 10 kids, 5 kids, 7 kids, and all of their kids are very family focused. Like I can see all of their children. If their kids come home from college or come home from a mission and they want to start a family right away, it wouldn't surprise me. They have been able to transmit and teach that vision of Mother Eve to their kids. And Camille M. Johnson says, um, like she talks about the pressures to put off children from the world. And she's like, because we believe differently, we will probably make choices that the world cannot make sense of.
Hmm.
I don't know if you remember that or had any thoughts about those two things.
I we've definitely experienced that our entire marriage. People being like, "Oh, Jenica needs to go work," or "You guys need to improve your situation by her earning money," and just have the kids go to daycare. Like we've experienced that, advice and pressure, and it's so sad because it doesn't make any sense to them. To them, like we're living foolishly when it's
Hmm.
really the other way around. It's not wealth and stuff like that that's going to bring you happiness. It'll make your life easier, like it'll make your life more comfortable. But I don't know about you, but for me, what makes me the happiest are in my life is my relationships with people, my family, my friends. I value that way more. And in finding good friends, like genuine people, people that are kind-hearted, that are humble, that are loving, that have the same values that you do. And so I think that like these prior generations, I think a lot of them were really happy because they had big families, and there's a lot of happiness and love and joy that comes from having children. I wish I could have more children. I hope that maybe like in the millennium, when our bodies are changed, I hope maybe Jenica can have some more children before we're done with this life. But that's where happiness comes from. It's not going on trips to Europe or Africa, although those are valuable experiences. It's good to like experience different cultures and stuff, but not over having children, like your own children. So yeah.
I was having this conversation with my husband the other day because um I I was seeing this trend in larger and maybe talking about dating to like the world of dating or whatnot now. I was like, man, men can mess up and still get their act together when they're like 40. Or they can start over again. And unfortunately, like in a military community, like we do see some pretty sad like divorces and remarriages and stuff. So we know guys that are starting over with the second family in their 40s, but they're older, and so they're just they understand how important they understand as maybe more mature men, like how fleeting and important and valuable those young years are with their babies. And they get a little, I feel like men do get a little more margin to get their act together. So, and this sounds, I know this, I really don't, this might be controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway because I think it's true and it's worked in my life, which is young women have such a short horizon to get their act together and to figure out what's important, because by the time you're late 20s or 30, your fertility is already declining and your opportunity to meet men that really you could make a life with decreases a lot. And so when you have culture telling you constantly, you have all the time in the world, you wait till you're 35. I have friends who are literally saying, I think I'm going to start taking, I can't meet, I want to start a family at 40. And I'm like, how are you, how have you come to this conclusion? And I also, on a more tragic side, I have several friends who are 40 who are not LDS, who have just had their first child for the first time, right? That's different than maybe having your last child. Like having your first child at 40, whew, and they're saying, why didn't anybody tell me? Why didn't anybody tell me how hard this was going to be? Why didn't anybody tell me how exhausting it was going to be? How physically, I wish I had started sooner. I wish someone had told me it would have been worth it to start sooner. And so there's a little more emphasis on the importance of culture to teach young women the truth about what brings happiness in life because they have such a shorter window to get their act together, right?
Yeah.
If guys waste time, like unfortunately, just the way fertility and life works, it's not fair, but it's reality. Like they can they can still recover, but I think it's harsher for women because if you waste your time traveling or maybe your ambitions are genuine. Like I had the opportunity to be in the Boston singles ward for a while and it was sad. All of these incredibly high achieving women, and there was nobody for them to date. And they had emphasized academia so much that there were like five guys in the ward, and there was no one for them to date. And they had just overemphasized. So that's the other thing they talk about better and best is it's like academia is valuable and we have emphasized it, but maybe we have overemphasized it to the detriment of prioritizing family. I think
Yeah.
is
Yeah. It's just
is
about
the
prioritizing. That's it. It's just about prioritizing. Like go for it. Go for an education or you can see you can succeed in life without going to college. There's like some people that take that route. They become entrepreneurs or whatever. That's great. But just to have your priorities straight, have your family above all the rest of it, all the stuff of this world. But yeah, it's kind of interesting because you may have the one side where you have the people that are like they want an education and they're like high powered people, they're go-getters, and that's like one flavor of it. The other flavor that I saw when we were at Fort Hood in Texas, um we had one of my wife's friends from high school came and stay with us, and uh at this point she was in her late 30s, and she had essentially been living, she's not a member of the church, by the way, but she's been like living this kind of like counterculture style. Like one of her big things was going to Burning Man and going to events
oh
like that,
okay.
and also traveling the world. And she'd been doing that like her entire adult life up until this point. And then we were having a serious conversation around the fire. We had a nice like fire pit behind the house, and she was like talking about her concern about having children, like how she's like at that point where she needs like make a choice because like time is running out. And since that time she has not made the choice to have children and start a family, but that's something that she was like very seriously considering. But this entire time, she's been living this like playful kind of like not responsible lifestyle or non-conventional lifestyle where she's just been essentially a perpetual, like you have like this whole generation of perpetual children, like people that don't grow up, people that just like want to continue life as like teenagers and just like going to this club or Burning Man or just like playing, like instead of like taking life like seriously and building up a
I
family,
actually
just like playing.
I actually I'm glad you brought this up because I actually would love to know these are some of my observations about singles wards, which I think were started with a really good intention. And I'd love to know people who might have like insights in the comment section, but I actually have seen how singles wards in college are really, really helpful. But when you keep singles wards older, like into your like late 20s, it has a tendency to perpetuate a kind of Peter Pan syndrome for both men and women. And the example I'll give is like time passes differently. There's phases of your life where you really feel time passing. And then there's places or spaces you might be in where it doesn't feel like time is passing at all. And you don't feel like you're aging at all. So like if you have a child or if your sibling has this child and you haven't seen that child in a while, after 6 months, you can't believe how much they've grown, or a year, you can't believe how much they've grown. But what I've seen happen in singles wards, even though they're such fun places, is several things. Is that young men and young women, especially maybe after 25, 26, they get into this zone where everybody's doing the same thing and time isn't passing. And there's a Peter Pan syndrome that is passed around. And the urgency, like, we want people to feel included, but part of going to a family ward is to recognize that it's not good for a man to be alone. Like, it's not the worst thing for someone who should be marriage age to go to a family ward and feel left out. Like, there's an element of impetus there. Like, yeah, go find a spouse. There's also an element of like, what I am grateful for growing up was that in our ward growing up, we had several women who had never married. And this was before they made the singles wards available to, like, this was back when like singles wards, it was like, I mean, you like 29 and you went back to the family ward. There was a pretty low cutoff. It's like, get married or go back to a family ward, right? So there was motivation. So she was always talking about how she had wished she had had the opportunity to get married. And I noticed when I was the Young Women's president, I noticed how none of these girls, a lot of them really looked at marriage like it was just this infinite resource, guaranteed. Like, oh, whenever I'm ready to get married, I can get married. And I sort of been like, you might not get that opportunity. Like, you might go out in the world and find that like not everybody wants to marry you. And I realized, well, the reason they think that is because there are no single women in our family wards anymore. They're all in the singles ward. And so
Yeah,
the
so they feel like
story
there's
and
like
the
an
lessons,
inevitability of it happening then, yeah.
yeah, so they don't know that you can end up single and alone. Like, they don't get those stories that are meant to be passed around in a normal community, because all of those women are in singles wards separate. We get the divorcees in our wards, but we don't, so they learn how terrible marriage is. But they don't get the women who are like, man, I really kind of wish I'd structured my life differently. I wish I'd dated more at BYU. I wish I had just made it, as embarrassing as it sounds to say out loud. Like, because I asked my seniors in Young Women's, I was like, can you say that you want to get married? And they're like, oh, absolutely not. You cannot say that's what you want to do as a graduating senior in high school. You have to tell people, like, this is what I want to major in, and this is what I want to do for a career. But you can't say, I want to be a mom. It's embarrassing. People will make fun of you. So I wanted to put that out in the ether about singles wards, in that I understand the intent, but I think there's some problematic aspects that have occurred as a result of allowing people to stay in singles wards forever. It changes the way they maybe perceive time. And
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we should probably wrap it up here. Just this sad, like, dystopian world that we're living in right now when it comes to family. So please, like, make a difference, like, teach your children, right? Be a good example, and make sure that you teach your children priorities, and you yourself try and live in a prioritized way. Um, but anyway, thank you, Rachel. It's been just such a long time since we've spoken on here, and so I'm glad
yeah,
that you've come back. Everybody make sure to subscribe to her. I'll put the link for her channel in the description box below. She's gonna be doing more content, and I'm excited to see that. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please make sure to subscribe. Like this video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below, or if you have any questions for Rachel, put it in the comments below. Also make sure to share this, and I'll talk to you guys later.